If you're going to make a doomsday prediction at some point or another, you're going to have to talk about the book of Revelation. And since we're talking about people who make doomsday predictions, we're going to talk about the book of Revelation. Hey Internet, my name is Jeff and I'm a pastor, and we have been talking about the passages that people point to when they're making doomsday predictions or talking about the end of the world. This is part 2 in this series, so make sure you take a look back at part 1. Basically, we're going through some of these passages that people point to when they're making doomsday predictions because we want to see if there's something more to them than just the world is going to end, so you better get busy and you better get to it and you better, I don't know, prep. Put some water in the cellar. Start growing some potatoes. I don't really know what people do when they're prepping. Anyway, we're trying to see if these passages are really just about gloom and doom, or if they're an invitation to something in the present, here and now, rather than just pointing to gloom and doom in the future. So today, and in the next video, we are going to be talking about the book of Revelation because, man, this is a popular one when people are talking about the end of the world. By the way, you may have noticed that I'm shooting at home today, so you might hear that lawnmower that's outside, or a 2.5-year-old who is downstairs right now being watched by his grandparents. So let's talk about the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is a letter written by a guy named John somewhere around the year 90 AD. That lawnmower is really loud. It's right there, right now. Can you hear it? Okay, it's going away. All right, so the book of Revelation is a letter written by a guy named John, who is a church leader in the 1st century, and it's written somewhere around the year 90 AD. Now, if this is a letter being written in the year 90 AD by a church leader, it means that it's being written to a church that is undergoing some sort of suffering, undergoing some sort of persecution. And so I want to ask you, if you're writing a letter or sending a card to somebody who's undergoing some sort of suffering, what are you going to do in this letter? What do you hope to accomplish in this letter or this card, email, text? Well, you're probably going to try to give somebody some sort of sense of peace or comfort, and maybe a little bit of perspective. And that's what we have going on in this letter. John, this church leader, he's writing to the churches throughout the Roman Empire, trying to give them a little bit of comfort, peace, and perspective given the persecution that they're going through at this time. Now, like I said, this was written around the year 90 AD, so, that means that it was written 1930 years ago or something like that. So I want you to imagine that you're writing that card to somebody, that letter, that email to somebody to try to give them some comfort given what they're going through, some suffering that they're going through. And in this card, this letter, this email, you tell them, hey, things are going to get better. In fact, in 1931 years, things are going to be just great. Do you think that this is going to be any sort of comfort to somebody who's going through some sort of suffering? They're going to say, 1931 years, what about now? What about what I'm going through right here and right now? What do you mean 1900 years from now? Get out of here. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to throw the card in the trash. They're going to be so angry, they're not even going to recycle it. So all of this is to say that if we take the book of Revelation and we make it all about us here in the present, and we make it all about some sort of impending end of the world that's going to be happening to us here in the 2020s, we're essentially doing the same thing. It means nothing to the original audience if we're making it all about us, and it means nothing to their present suffering that they're going through. So why on earth would John do that? So see, what we have in the book of Revelation is a letter written to people who are suffering in 90 AD. And so it's going to use language and symbols from 90 AD, and it's going to be a message of comfort to the people who are living in 90 AD. Does it have something to do with us or something to say to us? Yes, of course it does. The same way that a lot of the other letters and the Gospels and all of the other books of the Bible have something to say to us. But first, we have to get to the original context, and we have to get to how people understood it in the year 90 before we can get to how people can properly understand it in the year 2021. Now, the book of Revelation is a letter, as we've said, but it's a letter that you may notice as you start reading it is unlike any other letter that you may have read before. And it's because it uses this ancient set of symbols that people understood as apocalyptic symbols. Basically, the genre of this letter is an apocalypse. And any apocalyptic writings that you find from the first century and even before the first century are going to use some of these same stock symbols. Somebody once described the book of Revelation to me as kind of like a political cartoon. You know, in political cartoons, we have symbols that we understand, and we interpret the political cartoon in light of those symbols. So, just for example, if you were to see, I don't know, somebody riding a blue donkey into a White House, then we might understand that as, oh, the Democrats won the latest presidential election. These are symbols that we just understand in the year 2021 over here in America. So just imagine it's the year, I don't know, 3000. Actually, no, it's the year 4000. And you uncover a political cartoon that has somebody riding a blue donkey into a White House. Well, if you take it at face value, then you're going to say, okay, there's somebody riding a blue donkey into a White House. That's a little weird. But if somebody tried to go back to 2021 and understand it using our symbol set, you know, treat it responsibly, then they're going to know, oh, that means that in the year 2020, a Democrat won the presidential election in America, right? You have to do the work of understanding a particular set of symbols in their own context before you start to understand how to interpret it for the present day. And I want to say something else about apocalyptic literature or the book of Revelation. The word apocalypse, and by the way, in Greek, that's what Revelation is. It's literally called the Apocalypse of John. An apocalypse, or the word apocalypse, it literally means something like unveiling or revealing. In other words, something is being revealed in this. Something that was once covered up is now being uncovered. Somebody, John, is trying to shine a light on some present circumstances for some people. So let's take a look at a couple of passages in the book of Revelation and talk about what some of the ancient symbols are so that we can try to understand it and interpret it rightly for our present day, given the circumstances that were happening way back in the year 90. So let's take a look at Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 through 18. You can follow along in your own Bible, go to BibleGateway.com, whatever you have to do. I'll read it for you right now, though. So, then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of all, and by the signs it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast. It deceives the inhabitants of the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak, and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. It also caused all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. Now, this could mean a lot of different things. Taken at face value, it could be that there's some beast that's going to come and devour us all. Or I remember when I was a kid and those little shoppers key tags first started coming out. You know, you go to the grocery store and you have the little key tag with the barcode that you have to scan in order to get certain discounts. When those started coming out, people lost it. Well, some people lost it. A certain subset of Christians lost it because they thought, aha, here it is. It's the mark of the beast. You can't buy or sell anything without that barcode or that key tag. Or there are some people, I've actually heard this one before, there are some people who say, Apple Pay on the Apple Watch. It's on your hand, you buy and sell with it. That's the mark of the beast. I'm sure you've heard plenty of different things about the mark of the beast and the book of Revelation. You can find some crazy stuff. You can look online. Don't look online, but you can look online and find all sorts of different interpretations about what this mark of the beast is and what the beast is or who the beast might be. All sorts of different interpretations. And it could be that there are all sorts of different ways to understand this presently in 2021. But before we get to 2021, we probably need to talk about what it meant way back in the year 90. So what's happening in the year 90? Well, there was an evil dictator in the Roman Empire named Nero. And Nero died, Nero was killed, but the message of Nero lived on through different people. And in fact, when you go into some different temples, and including some temples where people worshiped the emperor, an emperor like Nero, some of the people who have excavated some of these temples have found all sorts of elaborate pulleys around statues of a particular idol or the emperor. And all of these pulleys could make it look like this being, this statue, was actually alive. So, I mean, you start to hear some of this stuff and you think, wait a minute, that actually sounds an awful lot like what's going on in Revelation 13, this being that's dead, but people are making it alive. Also, the message of Nero continued to live on. And so that's another way that Nero continued to live on even though he was dead. Also, kind of an important thing here. At the very end of this passage, you find the number 666, and sometimes in other translations, you'll find that that this number is 606. So it's either 666 or 606. Here's what's especially interesting about this. If you look at the name Caesar Nero, and you look at it numerically, it's the number 606. If you look at it grammatically correct as it would be Caesar Neron, and if you look at that numerically, it's 666. So how perfect is it that there just happens to be this evil emperor named Nero who died, but his message lived on, and there are some people who tried to make him live on through idols and statues with elaborate pulley systems, and his number could be either 666 or 606, just like it is in these manuscripts. It seems like it's talking about Nero, doesn't it? When you really start to look at it, start to look at the evidence, start to look at how people would have understood this in the year 90, it really looks like Revelation 13 is talking about this Emperor Nero. I remember one time when I was in college, it was my very first year of college. In fact, it was my very first class of my first year in college. It was an introduction to the Bible course, and we were talking about apocalyptic imagery, and we were talking about the entire thing about how it kind of sounds like a political cartoon. Some of the images do. And my professor said, for example, what if I showed you a picture of somebody whose head was shaped like a peanut and he had a big, bright, white smile? And I, of course, being born in the year 1984, raised my hand and said, wouldn't that be Mr. Peanut? You know, the corporate logo from Planters Peanuts with the cane and the monocle and the top hat. Yeah, that was my guess. The guy next to me, who is quite a bit older than me, he started laughing and said, actually, that's Jimmy Carter. Now, side note, I looked at the guy and I said, well, maybe if I were like 1,000 years old like you, then I would have understood that reference. And everybody started laughing, and I later found out that I said that to the dean. That was the dean auditing this class that I called 1,000 years old. He had a good sense of humor. We became friends after that. But it shows that if we don't try to understand things properly, and if we don't try to understand the symbols of the original time period in the original context, it can mean the difference between President Jimmy Carter and Mr. Peanut. Just throwing that out there, right? So we need to do the work, or else it could mean the difference between thinking that there's some beast that's gonna rise up and devour us all here in 2021, or it could be that John is trying to comfort a group of people in the year 90 using language and symbols that they would have understood, and talking about Nero and Nero's message in the year 90. So when we look at the book of Revelation, the book of Revelation could be a book all about how the end is coming very soon for us here in the year 2021. But originally, this was a letter meant to comfort people, a letter written by a pastor to comfort his people in the year 90. So what does it have to say for us? Well, when you look at what he was saying to the people who are in the year 90, maybe the message for us isn't get ready, a big beast is coming to devour us all. Maybe the message is, where do you ultimately find hope? Where do you ultimately find hope? Because empires, they're going to rise and fall. Even Nero, he's going to rise and fall. I mean, a lot of you who are watching this video may not have even ever heard of the name Nero, even though he was the emperor of this massive empire in the 1st century. Empires rise and fall. What do you ultimately put your hope in? Your party winning the election? Having the biggest army so that we can protect ourselves and conquer other nations if need be? Because nations rise and fall. What are you ultimately going to put your hope in? That's a strong message for the people in the year 90 who are undergoing suffering from this empire. It's also a really good message for us and a good question for us to ask ourselves. What do you put your hope in? Now, another takeaway that we can have from the book of Revelation is to consider that word apocalypse. Remember, that word apocalypse means something like revealing or unveiling. So I think that one thing that we can do walking away from the book of Revelation is to take that language of apocalypse seriously. You know, rather than looking outside and saying, my goodness, it looks like the apocalypse outside. Rather than using that word to say, it looks like everything is about to end, maybe we can use that word to ask ourselves, it looks like the apocalypse outside. Meaning something is being revealed, something is being unveiled. So we can ask ourselves, what's being revealed? What's being unveiled here? If something looks like the apocalypse, rather than fretting over it, maybe we need to ask, what is being unveiled or revealed here? A really good example of how we can start to get our heads around that is from this woman, Trudy Goodman. Trudy Goodman is a teacher. She lives in Los Angeles. And she wrote this at the very beginning of the lockdown. And we can end with this. When you go out and see the empty streets, the empty stadiums, the empty train platforms, don't say to yourself, it looks like the end of the world. What you're seeing is love in action. What you're seeing in that negative space is how much we do care for each other, for our parents, our grandparents, our brothers, our sisters, protecting people we will never meet. Look into that empty space and marvel at all that love. Let it fill you and sustain you. It isn't the end of the world. It is the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness. Isn't that incredible? It takes the word apocalypse seriously. Rather than saying the world is gonna end, we say, what's being revealed here? It's love. Love is being revealed here. So the next time something happens and you're saying, It's an apocalypse. The world is ending. Take that word apocalypse seriously and instead say, ooh, something's being revealed here. What's it going to be? And how can I be a part of it? All right, that's it. We are going to talk more about the book of Revelation in the next video, because the book of Revelation actually does talk about some sort of end. So we probably should talk about that end, since we are focusing these videos on the end. So stay tuned for that one. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Click like and subscribe. I hear it helps the algorithm. The algorithm. Yeah. Anyway, click like and subscribe. There's a bell somewhere down here. Click that bell so that you'll be notified when I post a new video, and I'll see you next time. Grace and peace, everybody.